Last time I focused on process, but on Sunday I had completely forgotten about that. I started off my study session on Sunday by pulling up a video from Just Your Draw Party, and I watched video 241 to do studies from it. They are a really great YouTube channel that does a lot of videos with models who will do different poses. They do 5 1-minute poses, 4 2-minute poses, and 1 5-minute pose, and that's consistent with all of the videos of theirs that I have personally watched. I think that their videos are a lot of fun to draw from, so that's what I wanted to try out for this drawing session. And I noticed that throughout these poses I was really scribbly, and I didn't really approach it with the process that I was trying to develop in my last video. As I worked through the video, I didn't know that the time increments changed with the progression of the session, so I thought that it was just going to be all 1-minute poses. And then we flew past the first 5, and it turned into 2-minute poses. And it took me a pose or two to realize that when I had additional time. And I got to the last 5-minute pose, which there's only one in the video, but I got down to that last pose and I felt defeated. I honestly should have watched through the video first to see if they had different time frames, because I rushed through the 5-minute pose in like a minute or two, and I really struggled with trying to get any detail or anything back into the pose, and it left me feeling pretty defeated because it turned out really bad. It did not look like a 5-minute pose. So after feeling really defeated from this study session, I went onto Pinterest and found a reference photo that I wanted to do a quick study from, and I took my time more with this one, and it didn't go very well. I ended up quitting on that one and just generally having a really hard time. So because I felt so defeated from this study session, I decided that I needed to do something about it. So I wanted to take some notes. And this was like a breakdown to notes that I hadn't really tried before. It just kind of came to me at the moment. So on a yellow sticky note, I wrote down kind of a summary of everything that happened to give myself an idea in the future of how to explain the events of this study session for the video for you guys to see what happened and hear like what I was feeling and what I was going through at the time. And I realized later on that it was really important for me to take note of my frustration or my irritation with myself in study sessions, because it revealed a pattern later on. Not in this video, but in future study sessions, and I've been able to since address it, so that's been very enlightening. And I realized throughout doing the summary that I really didn't apply any of the stuff that I was working on the past week. So the week leading up to this point, if you want to see that video, it'll be linked in the iCard and in the description. So after I wrote down a summary of everything that happened, I went around and on the page wrote notes next to some of the figures, tried to identify areas where maybe I did use more than I thought I did of the process that I was trying to build. And I went into writing a little reflection, and I wrote, "What happened to the process?" with a question mark. And I wrote a little note to self saying I tried to be quick and get it down instead of working on my shapes and process from last week. So that gave me a lot to think about. It occurred to me that I looked back on my notes of the previous day, and I didn't set an intention going into this study session to make sure that I was studying the right thing. I have a bad habit of kind of getting wrapped up into timed studies and not focusing on the part of it that I wanted to actually learn from. And instead, I get really carried away by trying to be really quick and keeping up with the timer and getting down the pose. And that's not really conducive to learning how anatomy works. I mean, it can over time, but I wanted to learn to break down anatomy as well and learn how I can better bring the things that I'm going to learn into my illustrative work. So I wrote a little intention for myself at the end of my notes, and I wrote, tomorrow, focus on the shapes and identifying parts of the torso. Pretty simple. So on Monday, I wanted to do another gesture draw party video. I used video number 233 for this study session, and I started off the day by reviewing those notes on Sunday. So I went into Monday with the idea in the front of my mind that I needed to focus on shapes and the process of how I construct the body. If you didn't watch the previous video in the series, this is just me trying to figure out what shapes work the best for me when it comes to indicating the head, torso, and pelvis, and how I can more easily find the direction that each body part is facing. So I jumped into this study session, and it looks pretty rough, I gotta say. But I do see that I focused more on shapes. And then I finished off this study session feeling pretty good about where I was going. The last two in this study session felt pretty decent, and I wrote a few notes to myself, not as detailed as the notes from Sunday, but still a good amount of notes. I wrote, I did better implementing more specific shapes. Identifying muscle and bone was confusing and difficult in the quick studies. 5 minutes felt good. Head shape was difficult, and I exaggerated the muscles to find them. So, in the last study, I exaggerated the muscles of the dude I was drawing to help identify them a little bit better, try to find them better in the pose. I did work on torso anatomy before this week, so I wanted to start implementing some of the stuff that I learned from that. And then we moved on to Tuesday. I started off with 2 very quick studies. They felt really weird, but I mostly felt like I just needed to start working on arm anatomy and breaking down the muscle and bones that are there. to get a better understanding of how it all works together. I highly recommend ModernDayJames. He has a series here on YouTube about deconstructing George Bridgeman, and I really loved the way that he explained the way that the arm works, how he did all of the drawing constructions of the bones and the muscle, and how he explained the difference between flexed and stretched muscles. I found it really informative, and I took a lot of notes, and I copied just about everything that he drew on screen, as much as I really didn't want to, because it felt really tedious at the time. But it was really important for me to get in this much of a deep dive into arm anatomy, because I've struggled with arm anatomy for quite a while. And by the end of doing all of these studies, I really didn't want to draw anymore, but I also felt like it was really important for me to start implementing it as soon as possible. So I pulled up some pictures on Pinterest of bodybuilders, and I started drawing the upper body of a few bodybuilders and tried to point out where all of the muscles were. This was by far the best practice that I did throughout the entire week. I really want to come back to doing more stuff like this in the future, where I'm implementing the anatomical breakdown into a study and then trying to figure out where each of the muscles are. It was really tricky, but it was also a lot of fun trying to figure out. And on this day, I didn't really write any notes. I know that I ended off the day feeling really good about my studies and the direction that I was headed, but I didn't write any notes. And this has proved to be a crucial misstep in this week of studies, because in all of the previous days, I built up this really good momentum of building up to this point where I started to feel like really good about my studies, and I got really confident, but I didn't leave any notes for my future self to replicate the success of this study session. So I know that I had a lot going through my mind, and I know that I had a lot of things in my head that were starting to make sense, and I didn't write any notes about any of those things. So I have a lot of regret for not putting that on the page for myself now to be able to remind myself of. And the rest of the week is kind of downhill from here, because on Wednesday I decided to take a break from doing my studies. And breaks are great. Like, they are really important for learning and improving, as long as you time them correctly to keep yourself from burning out. If you really need the break, you should take it. I took a break on Wednesday because I felt like I didn't need to study, because I felt really good about the day before, when in reality, this is when I should have been making sure that I was coming back every day for the next few days to really drill home all of the stuff that I spent a couple hours learning about arm anatomy. I definitely think I'm going to have to come back and make sure that I'm doing a more focused practice on arm anatomy a few times to make sure that I'm actually memorizing all of this stuff. So on Thursday, I couldn't recover the momentum that I built up. I had just lost it. I couldn't get back to where I was on Tuesday, so I just did a handful of studies and called it a day. I think I just did a few studies from Pinterest, and that was pretty much it. I think the last study I did was actually pretty good, but the rest of them I feel like were pretty rough. And you'll notice at the end of Thursday, I didn't write any notes either, and unfortunately, I didn't come back to do my studies on Friday. So, it was a week of art that was cut quite short, but it taught me a lot about how important it is for me to take notes. I stepped away from my sketchbook and doing studies for a long time after this study session, and it was mostly because I didn't know where to pick up where I left off, because I wasn't leaving notes for myself to come back from. And that's another thing that I really liked about the notes that I was taking at the beginning of the week, is that I felt like I was setting myself up for success the next time I sat down with my sketchbook, regardless of whether it was the day after or if it was like a few days later, because I gave myself an intention for the next day. So in this week, I learned 4 important types of notes that now I take all the time in my studies. And the main one that I put in all of my study sessions now is summaries. Whether I'm jotting down ideas as I'm studying or I'm just doing a little paragraph at the end about the overall session, I just kind of summarize what I did, how it felt, my reflections, I do every once in a while so that I can make sure I'm staying on the right track, making sure that I'm not veering off course too much, and that I am focusing on the correct skills that I want to build upon right now. And the third type is my assignments. Giving myself an assignment for the next day is a great way for me to hold myself accountable, or to give myself somewhere to start when I come back to my sketchbook. If I'm coming in days later, the day after I wrote the assignment, or even months later, it gives me a starting off point, and it helps me rebuild up my consistency and come back to my sketchbook more often when I have a starting point and I don't have to think of what I'm going to do first when I come back to my sketchbook. And the final type of note that I've been taking is the anatomical breakdowns. Like you saw in this week, I did the breakdown of the arm. I am going to do that for each part of the body, and then I do want to do something in a few weeks to bring it all together, making sure that I am going to learn all of the things from all of these anatomical breakdowns, and I actually already know what I'm going to do for that, and I'm really excited. I can't wait to show you guys what I'm up to next time. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I know that this isn't going to be the way that everybody learns or improves in their art. I just wanted to share what was working for me, and maybe if you're stuck, give this a try. This is what works for me, and I highly recommend just taking notes to remind yourself of what you're doing, what you're working towards in your sketchbook. And that's all I really have to say for now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.